Welcome to the Dream Novel channel. Before starting to listen to the fun in this clip, don't forget to like and comment, so that the admin will have the encouragement to continue making clips. Let's go listen. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 26, Rattan. Early the next morning, Kyle was forced out of bed by the bright sunlight streaming through the dormitory's round window. Since he hadn't drawn the curtains the previous night, the sunbeams hit him squarely in the face like a spotlight. How was anyone supposed to sleep like that? Grudgingly, Kyle got dressed and stretched, then walked over to the window. Although Hogwarts Castle is partly underground, the dormitory was situated in a sunny part of the structure. From the circular window, he could see the grass and dandelions swaying outside in the morning breeze. Kyle glanced at his two roommates, who were still fast asleep, and without a second thought, opened the window as wide as it would go. There were only 5 years until the OWL's exam. How could they still be sleeping at a time like this? Besides, it was already 7:30, which might as well have been 8:50 in his mind, with only a few minutes left before classes began at 9 o'clock. Since this was their very first day of lessons at Hogwarts, they couldn't afford to make a bad impression on the professors by being late. And what better way to wake up than with the fresh morning air, with its hint of moisture? "I'm really considerate," Kyle nodded to himself in satisfaction. He was genuinely thinking of his roommates. It wasn't that he wanted them to get up early with him. After all, a Hufflepuff like him would never do something like that. After a quick wash, Kyle left the dormitory and made his way through the passage toward the common room. As everyone knows, the stairs at Hogwarts have a mind of their own. They seem to move at the most inconvenient times, often leaving students stranded or extending to unexpected floors, all while silently enjoying the wizard's despair. Kyle was ready to make several trips around the castle, anticipating that the stairs might cause trouble. But, much to his surprise, the stairs stayed in place the entire time. He walked from the common room to the Great Hall without a single shift or jolt. The entire journey was eerily quiet. To be honest, Kyle was a little disappointed. He had kind of been looking forward to experiencing the infamous moving stairs for himself. Even though it wasn't yet 8 o'clock, the Great Hall already had quite a few students seated for breakfast. The Ravenclaw table, in particular, was nearly full, while a few older students from other houses were scattered around. Only the Hufflepuff table remained mostly empty, except for Kyle. As soon as he sat down, a steaming breakfast appeared on the plate in front of him. A glass of milk, 2 sausages, and a piece of bread. It wasn't much, but it was just right, and he could always have more if he wanted. Kyle ate his breakfast slowly, savoring the quiet. Before long, 2 familiar figures appeared in the doorway of the Great Hall, walking in one after the other. "Hey, Kyle, what are you doing up so early?" Mikkel and Ryan hurried over to join him. "I didn't want to get up early either," Kyle said calmly, cutting into his sausage. "But the window in our dorm room was open, and the wind was blowing in, so it got too cold to sleep." Without missing a beat, he asked, "What about you two? Why are you up so early?" "We're in the same boat," Mikkel said with a bitter expression. "I was wondering if you were the one who opened the window." "The window was open when I left," Kyle emphasized the words, "when I left." "Oh, I see. Then it must have been the wind," Mikkel said, taking a large bite of bread. "But I guess it was a good thing in the end. I didn't fall asleep until the early hours of the morning. If the window hadn't been open, I definitely wouldn't have woken up before 9. Imagine being late for the first class. I shudder to think what would have happened. I probably would have been expelled right on the spot." Ryan, who was eating beside him, nodded in agreement. He usually got up around 8 at home, but only because his mother dragged him out of bed. If he'd slept in until he naturally woke up, he likely wouldn't have made it to their first class either. Kyle smiled slyly and said, "Then you two should really thank the kind person who helped open the window." "Yes, definitely," Mikkel said, nodding sleepily as he chewed on his breakfast, not noticing anything unusual in Kyle's comment. "It really helped a lot." Kyle took his final sip of milk, then stood up. "Well, you two enjoy your breakfast. I'm going to go explore the area a bit." "Okay," they both replied in unison, still groggy. After bidding farewell to his roommates, who were still focused on their breakfast, Kyle made his way straight to the castle gates. It was just past 8 o'clock, so he had plenty of time before class started. While he still had some time, he decided to deal with his pet problem first. There was already a cat and a toad in the dormitory, and he couldn't afford to be the only one without a companion. Stepping out through the castle gates, Kyle raised his arm skillfully. In an instant, 7 or 8 owls swooped in from all directions, landing neatly on the stone steps in front of him. "This time, it's not about sending a letter," Kyle said, addressing the group of owls. "I'm going to be at Hogwarts for quite some time, and I'd like to hire one of you as my personal messenger during my stay. In return, well, meals will be included, at least 1 package of owl nuts per day, 3 packages of Murtlap dried rat meat per week, and 1 bottle of owl tonic per month, for now. If you need anything else, just ask. Oh, and this arrangement will continue even after I graduate, until the day you can no longer lift your wings." Kyle paused, letting his offer sink in. "So, how about it? If any of you are interested, just fly up onto my shoulder." Owls in the wizarding world had a natural affinity for magic, especially those trained to be special messengers. With a bit of body language and Kyle's clear instructions, the owls were able to understand about 70 to 80% of what he said. Almost immediately, chaos broke out. The owls scrambled to reach Kyle's shoulder, with some of the slower ones even attacking the others in their haste. Feathers flew everywhere as the owls fought for position, and Kyle found himself scratching his head, trying to calm the frenzy. But it was too late, the situation had spiraled beyond his control. Thankfully, the chaos didn't last long. A large brown fishing owl, towering over the others with its imposing size, easily overpowered the competition. It stood proudly on Kyle's shoulder, victorious. Kyle recognized the owl immediately. About 3 years ago, Chris had found this owl near death, battered and covered in wounds, clutching an undelivered letter in its claws at the entrance of the Ministry of Magic's mail collection counter. Chris had acted quickly, taking the owl home and nursing it back to health over the course of more than half a month. Despite his best efforts, however, the owl was left with a long, narrow scar across its face, a permanent reminder of the dark magic that had injured it. Neither Chris nor Newt had been able to remove or conceal the scar, which made the owl look somewhat ugly compared to its peers. But Kyle didn't care about appearances. He reached out and scratched the brown fishing owl's neck feathers, grinning. "Hello, Rattan." The owl tilted its head, gently rubbing Kyle's finger with its beak. Rattan was the nickname Kyle had given him early on, back when he didn't know the owl's real name. It had stuck, and Rattan had even come to recognize it. Kyle remembered when Hagrid came to fetch him one time and had spent over half an hour calling Sabin, Sabin, in the nearby woods without getting a response. But the moment Kyle quietly whispered Rattan, the owl had flown out leisurely, much to Hagrid's shock. Hagrid had been so stunned that he stood there, speechless, unable to recover for a long time. It was as if Kyle had stolen the owl that Hagrid had worked so hard to care for, leaving the gentle giant looking thoroughly devastated. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 27, First Class. Although Kyle never had to worry about delivering letters personally, having his own owl at Hogwarts was still a good idea. In the wizarding world, owls served a similar function to phone numbers in the Muggle world. They often represented the identity of their owner. And that was still quite important. Take, for instance, Kyle's mother, Diana, who worked in the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic. This department had very strict security protocols, and letters sent there were meticulously screened. The ministry would check everything, from the identity and status of the owl, to the sender's details, and even the letter itself, ensuring there were no hidden jinxes or magical substances. Only after everything was confirmed would the letter be delivered to the Department of Mysteries, often in the form of a paper airplane. Even Kyle's letters weren't exempt from this process, though they were expedited due to his connection. With the efficiency of the Ministry of Magic, this entire screening process could take at least a day. But with Ratton, things were different. Diana could apply to have him registered as a special owl. This status would grant priority processing, and the screening could be simplified. Instead of the full inspection, they would only need to verify the owl's status, the sender's identity, and perform a basic check for jinxes, all of which could be done on the spot. Diana had reminded Kyle of this when they were at platform 9 3/4, telling him to use the same owl consistently for his letters, or else he'd need to buy one from Diagon Alley. Naturally, Kyle had no intention of buying an owl when he already had Ratton. Problem solved. Kyle took some owl nuts from his moleskin pouch, along with a few bags of Murtlap dried rat jerky, and offered them to the group of owls. He also grabbed some water, added 2 bottles of owl tonic, stirred it well, and poured the mixture into a stone trough nearby. This was their payment for the trouble. They couldn't be expected to lose their feathers for nothing. While the owls feasted, Kyle took Ratton back to the castle and headed straight for the Hufflepuff common room. Passing the barrels in the kitchen corridor, he returned to the dormitory, but Mikkel and Ryan were already gone, likely off to class. Not giving it much thought, Kyle placed Ratton on the shelf beside his bed, grabbed his textbooks, and left. In the common room, he ran into Cedric, who was also getting ready to head out. "Kyle, I was just about to look for you," Cedric said, approaching quickly. "What's your first class?" "Charms," Kyle replied, shaking the standard book of spells, beginner's level in his hand. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, right. Here," Cedric said, handing Kyle a piece of parchment. "This is a map of Hogwarts that the class rep gave me when I first enrolled. It marks the classrooms and some of the stairway changes. I don't need it anymore, so I figured you could use it." Hogwarts was impressive in many ways, but it was undeniably huge and confusing. The interior was like a maze, and it wasn't uncommon for first years to get lost. Being late to class, as a result, was a common issue. Fortunately, most professors were understanding of this, and aside from one strict dean, they tended to either turn a blind eye, give a light verbal warning, or deduct a point or two, without taking it too seriously. Kyle unfolded the parchment and examined it closely. Though it was just an ordinary map, it was incredibly detailed. It clearly marked all the routes from the Hufflepuff common room to each classroom and even indicated where to wait for the stairs to shift before continuing. It was like a simplified version of a live map, but good enough for Kyle's needs. "Thanks, I really needed this," Kyle said as he tucked the map away. "By the way, what class do you have first?" "I have potions." "Wait, potions?" Cedric's eyes widened in sudden realization, and before Kyle could say anything more, Cedric took off running. "I'll go ahead, Kyle. Just remember, never be late for potions class. That's the most important thing at Hogwarts." Cedric's voice faded as he disappeared down the corridor, his panic clear from his hurried departure. Kyle couldn't help but think Snape must have left a deep psychological scar on Cedric, or perhaps on many young wizards. He suspected he might not be able to escape Snape's wrath either. Too bad Harry Potter didn't enroll a year earlier. That would have been great, Kyle muttered to himself, shaking his head. With that, he left the common room, heading to his first class. Charm's classroom was on the 3rd floor, and it was easy for Kyle to find, thanks to the map Cedric had given him. As he entered the classroom, the first thing he noticed was a stack of books arranged in the shape of a staircase, with 4 portraits of wizards hanging on the wall. Though they were likely famous figures, Kyle didn't recognize any of them. On either side of the room, the emblems of the 4 Hogwarts houses were displayed, while further inside were long tables for the students. When Kyle arrived, there were still 5 minutes before class began. He wasn't early, but surprisingly, there weren't many students in the room yet, and even Professor Flitwick was nowhere to be seen. Kyle found a seat, noting that the room was divided between Hufflepuffs and Ravenclaws, with the latter sitting opposite him. As 9 o'clock approached, more students rushed in, panting from their sprint to class. Kyle spotted Kanna among them, but unfortunately, she stormed past him without a word. At exactly 8:59, Mikkel and Ryan stumbled in, just barely on time. "Thank goodness, we're not late," Mikkel panted as he collapsed into his seat next to Kyle. He was out of breath, but that didn't stop him from launching into a complaint. "We got lost. My goodness, Hogwarts is a real maze," he continued, shaking his head. "We were supposed to head to the 3rd floor, but the stairs shifted when we were on the 2nd floor, and somehow, we ended up on the 5th floor." Ryan nodded in agreement, chiming in, "Then we started walking back down, but it took us forever to realize we were still stuck on the 5th floor." Mikkel threw his hands up in frustration. "We finally made it down, but we ended up back on the 2nd floor. Kyle, we climbed those stairs for 30 whole minutes, my legs are about to give out." As Mikkel became more and more agitated, he was practically on the verge of tears. "Wait a minute, this doesn't make sense." "Give me a second," Kyle said, rubbing his forehead, trying to make sense of their story. Even if someone was lost, it should still be easy to tell whether they were going up or down. What they were describing seemed more like some bizarre metaphysical phenomenon than magic. And there hadn't been anything about this in the map Cedric gave him. "Forget it, never mind," Kyle eventually said, giving up on figuring out the mystery. "So how did you guys end up here?" "We were brought here," Mikkel admitted, his face turning red as he pointed across the room. "We bumped into a first-year Ravenclaw on the 5th floor. She helped us down the revolving staircase and asked if we were headed to the charms class. She said we could follow her." Kyle glanced in the direction Mikkel was pointing and saw the student sitting with her classmates and realized Mikkel was referring to Ravenclaw's Cho Chang. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 28, Lighting Charm. Kyle didn't know much about Cho Chang, Cedric's future girlfriend and Harry Potter's unattainable crush, besides the fact that she was in Ravenclaw. But now, there was something new he could add to that: she was helpful. After all, not every Ravenclaw would go out of their way to help others. Many preferred to immerse themselves in their own thoughts, often revolving around schoolwork or intellectual pursuits. That didn't mean they were indifferent, they just tended to be more reserved. If someone asked them for help, they would usually oblige, but they rarely took the initiative. Cho Chang was chatting with her friends nearby, so Kyle simply glanced at her and then looked away. "It's only the first class, and we barely made it," Mikkel groaned, clutching his hair in frustration. "What are we going to do for the rest of the year? We can't leave an hour early for every lesson. If this keeps up, I'm bound to be late one day." "Don't worry, the professors at Hogwarts won't expel you for being late," Kyle reassured him, giving him a comforting pat on the shoulder. "At most, they'll just deduct some house points. Speaking of which, I've got something that might help you out." "Something good?" Mikkel and Ryan leaned in with curious expressions. Kyle pulled out the map Cedric had given him and spread it across the table. "You can thank Cedric for this. Without it, you'd have been lost for much longer." Mikkel was still trying to figure out what it was, but Ryan, whose father was a wizard, immediately recognized it. "A map of Hogwarts," he gasped. "Where did you get this? Can I make a copy? I swear I'll return it after class." "Of course, we're roommates." Kyle grinned, then turned to Mikkel. "What about you? Want to copy it too?" Mikkel was tempted, but after some thought, he shook his head. This was his first time in the magical world, and he didn't want to miss any opportunity to learn, especially during an important class like charms. "Can I wait until after class to copy it?" Mikkel asked. "Sure," Kyle nodded, tapping his wand lightly on the map. Geminio. In an instant, a perfect duplicate of the map appeared beside the original. Kyle picked up the copy, gave it a quick once-over, and then handed it to Mikkel. "Here you go. The magic on this should last about a week, so you can copy it whenever you're ready." Mikkel took the map with a puzzled look, then glanced over at Ryan, who appeared equally confused. Ryan shifted awkwardly, glancing between Kyle and the duplicated parchment, his face growing warm. He was about to say something when a voice interrupted them from the front of the room. "Nice doubling charm, Hufflepuff. 5 points." Kyle jumped in surprise and looked up, his eyes locking on Cho Chang across the table. She was smiling slightly, but it wasn't her who had spoken. Upon closer inspection, Kyle realized there was someone standing right in front of him. The person was so short that they had been completely hidden behind the table. "Thank you for your praise, Professor Flitwick," Kyle replied with a polite nod. Flitwick smiled warmly. "I'm just being honest." "Mr. Chopper, is that your name?" Kyle nodded again. "Yes, Professor." "Well, it seems my memory hasn't failed me yet," Flitwick chuckled, then turned his attention to Mikkel. "May I take a look at that map?" Mikkel, initially unsure of who the small wizard was, quickly realized after hearing Kyle's address. He handed over the map with both hands, stammering slightly. Yes, Professor. "Thank you." Flitwick took the map and examined it carefully, sensing the magic within. After a moment, he handed it back to Mikkel with a satisfied nod. "Ah, the magic is stable. If nothing unusual happens, this copy should last until noon in about 8 days." He winked at Kyle before adding with a slightly regretful tone, "If the end-of-term exam was on the doubling charm, I would have given you an outstanding. But for now, I can only award Hufflepuff 3 more points." "Professor." A young Ravenclaw which raised her hand, looking curious. "Can't objects created with the doubling charm exist permanently?" "No, Miss Middle," Flitwick replied. "If that were possible, we wouldn't need so much parchment in Muggle stores. Copies made with the doubling charm eventually fade. And Dumbledore can't make permanent copies either," another witch asked. Flitwick shook his head. "Not even the headmaster can make them last forever. Even if the copies could last 100 years, they would still eventually disappear." "Now, that's enough about the doubling charm," he said, clapping his hands to refocus the class. "It's a bit advanced for you at this stage. Let's begin today's lesson." Turning to the class, Flitwick addressed the room. "Today, we'll be learning one of the most basic and essential charms, the lighting charm. The incantation is Lumos. Everyone, pay close attention." Kyle wasn't surprised that their first lesson in charms involved the lighting charm. It was considered one of the simplest and most fundamental spells in the wizarding world. There were no complex hand movements involved. Just a wand, the correct incantation, and focus. Historically, the lighting charm was even used to differentiate wizards from squibs due to its simplicity and near-perfect success rate. If a person couldn't perform this charm, they likely weren't a wizard at all. After demonstrating the casting process, Professor Flitwick encouraged the young wizards to try it for themselves. The room soon flickered with lights of various brightness as students attempted the spell. Kyle wasn't the first to succeed, but when his wand lit up, the glow was steady and consistent. The light resembled a soft, steady electric bulb, shining with a calm, white glow. Unfortunately, there were no extra points for this, as Kyle wasn't alone in mastering the charm. 7 Ravenclaw students across the room had also managed to produce stable lights with their wands. Hufflepuff wasn't far behind, though. They had 6 successful wizards, making the competition between the two houses fairly close. "Don't forget what I said earlier, stay calm," Flitwick reminded the class in his high-pitched voice. "You must remain steady, just like when holding something fragile. And remember, pronunciation is crucial. Don't mispronounce the incantation." With the professor's encouragement, more students began producing steady, glowing lights with their wands. Kyle glanced over at his 2 roommates. Mikkel and Ryan were still struggling to get their wands to light up properly. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 29, The Charms Professor Who Questions Life. Ryan was making some progress. He had switched from the weak, intermittent flickers to a steady flashlight mode, and the frequency of fluctuations was steadily decreasing. It seemed like he was close to achieving success. Mikkel, however, was struggling. The light on his wand was wildly unstable. At its brightest, it was blinding like a searchlight, but at its weakest, it barely glowed like a firefly and looked as if it might go out at any second. The more erratic the light became, the more anxious Mikkel grew. And the more anxious he became, the less control he had over the spell. It had turned into a vicious cycle. "Hey, Kyle tried to offer some help, but before he could say anything, he noticed Mikkel suddenly take a deep breath and sharply raise his wand. For reasons Kyle couldn't explain, a sense of foreboding rose in his chest, as if something terrible was about to unfold. The feeling hit him so suddenly that he didn't even have time to process it. Almost instinctively, he turned away, bowing his head and squeezing his eyes shut. At that exact moment, a blinding flash of light filled the charm's classroom, as if a flashbang had just gone off. The burst of light was intense but brief, disappearing after a second, though its effects were catastrophic. The unexpected brilliance caught most of the young wizards off guard, blinding them. Cries of pain and panic quickly filled the room as students clutched at their eyes, stumbling, pushing, and trying to escape the classroom in disarray. Even Professor Flitwick wasn't spared, though his years of experience kept him calmer than the frantic students. Fighting off the discomfort, he called out in his high-pitched voice, "It's okay, everyone, don't panic. Stay calm, you'll be able to see in a moment." Despite his reassurances, his words did little to quell the pandemonium. The classroom remained in chaos, filled with the sounds of panicked students. If anyone had walked in just then, they might have thought Voldemort himself had stormed the school. To make matters worse, Flitwick had been turned in the wrong direction the entire time, his back facing the students as he yelled his comforting words at the wall. The four wizards in the painting behind him were thoroughly unimpressed. Although they had been startled by the sudden flash, as portraits, they weren't affected by the aftermath. To them, Flitwick's current behavior seemed as ridiculous as a Tebow warthog with a lump on its head. At that moment, in the charm classroom, the only ones who managed to stay unaffected were Kyle, who had instinctively dodged the risk, and a few other fortunate students. Despite their own good fortune, there wasn't much they could do to fix the situation. Instead, they focused on comforting their fellow students and helping those who had fallen in the chaos, trying to prevent a stampede from happening. After several tense minutes, the blinding aftereffects of the light finally began to wear off, and the students' vision slowly returned. "Oh, Merlin's beard, what a disaster," muttered Professor Flitwick as he rubbed his eyes, shakily climbing down from behind his desk. In his attempt to reassure the young wizards, he had inadvertently gone the wrong way, tripped, and taken a tumble. Now, Professor Flitwick was furious. In his decades of teaching, he'd witnessed countless magical mishaps, students getting hit by a misfired accio, cows summoned with the levitation charm, locks exploding under a faulty unlocking charm. None of these things fazed him because they were expected in a classroom filled with students still learning magic. But never, in all his years, had he imagined that a simple lighting charm could cause such chaos. Gritting his teeth in frustration, Professor Flitwick led the now somewhat recovered students toward the culprit, both angry and curious to confront them. Mikkel, however, was lying motionless on a desk. Professor Flitwick called his name several times, but there was no response. Mikkel remained still, looking oddly peaceful. Sensing that something wasn't right, the professor hurried over to check on him. After a quick examination, he delivered his verdict: "He's fine, but he's in a coma due to magical exhaustion." Hearing this, Kyle let out a sigh of relief. By magical exhaustion, the professor didn't mean that Mikkel had drained his magical reserves entirely, but that he had overextended himself, like an ordinary person who hadn't slept for 2 days and nights. Professor Flitwick's gaze became distant, unfocused. Magical exhaustion? From a lighting charm? This was the second time in a matter of minutes that he found himself questioning everything he knew. Could he really have been at Hogwarts for so long that he was out of touch? In all his knowledge of wizarding history, spanning thousands of years, he had never heard of anyone collapsing from casting a lighting charm. Sensing the professor's confusion, Kyle hesitated for a moment before offering, "Professor, should I take him to Madame Pomfrey? It's probably not a good idea to just leave him lying here like this. She should check him out." Yes, you're right," Flitwick said, snapping out of his daze. "Take him quickly. Madame Pomfrey will know what to do." After receiving Professor Flitwick's permission, Kyle quickly cast a floating charm on Mikkel and guided him out of the classroom. Normally, Professor Flitwick would have awarded extra credit for such quick thinking, but given the current situation, Kyle was lucky not to have points deducted. A reward was out of the question. After all, who needed extra credit at a time like this? Not long after leaving the classroom, Kyle spotted a cat sitting at the corner, not a cat girl, but an actual cat, with two amber eyes staring at him intently. "Mrs. Norris? That's great!" Kyle exclaimed, recognizing Filch's infamous companion. "A student's hurt. I need to get to Madame Pomfrey, but I don't know the way. Could you help me?" Although Cedric had given him a map of Hogwarts that marked the hospital wing, Kyle had never actually been there and wasn't familiar with the exact route. But Mrs. Norris was different. She had roamed Hogwarts alongside Filch for years and knew the castle better than most. Surely, she'd know the quickest way to the hospital. The cat tilted her head slightly, taking a glance at Kyle and the levitating Mikkel behind him. Without a word, she stood up and began walking toward the stairs on the right. Was that a yes? Kyle wasted no time in following her. The three of them, Kyle, Mikkel, and Mrs. Norris, made their way through the school, zigzagging between staircases, and at one point even cutting through a hidden passage behind a statue. Within a few minutes, they arrived at a courtyard outside the Great Hall. In the center stood a massive clock, which gave the courtyard its name, Pendulum Clock Courtyard. When they arrived, Mrs. Norris crouched near the base of the clock, her tail pointing toward a staircase behind her as if instructing Kyle to head up. "Thank you. I'll bring you some dried fish," Kyle said gratefully, extending his hand to pat the cat's head. But Mrs. Norris skillfully avoided his touch, her ears flattening back like tiny airplane wings as she gave Kyle a warning look. With a flick of her tail, she darted away and disappeared, as if she'd cast her own vanishing charm. "Ha, arrogant," Kyle muttered, withdrawing his hand in frustration. He had no choice but to shrug it off and continue up the stairs with Mikkel in tow. The staircase was a fixed one, so there was no risk of it shifting unexpectedly. All he had to do now was follow it straight to the hospital wing. Channel Dream Novel. Chapter 30, The Potions Professor and the Magic-Suppressing Potion. Madame Pomfrey, a tall witch renowned for her expertise in healing, potions, and medicinal herbs, was a figure of both respect and mystery at Hogwarts. Rumor had it that St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Injuries had extended an invitation to her 3 times, offering her the role of vice president if she accepted. However, she had always refused, insisting on staying at Hogwarts. Though the rumor was widespread, neither she nor St. Mungo's had ever confirmed or denied it, leaving it as one of Hogwarts' minor unsolved mysteries. As Kyle entered the hospital wing, he saw Madame Pomfrey bustling around, tending to her patients. She handed a green potion to a young wizard in one of the beds. "This is the last bottle of scabies medicine. Apply it regularly, and stop drinking any more potions," she instructed sternly before turning to another bed. Muttering under her breath, she complained, "Why are so many young wizards getting sent here this time of year? What are those professors doing? So irresponsible." It was clear she was in a foul mood, and Kyle hesitated, unsure how to approach her with Michael's condition. But Madame Pomfrey caught sight of them before he could decide what to say. "By Merlin's beard! What happened to this child?" she gasped, rushing over to gently place Mikkel onto an empty bed. Without looking up, she asked briskly, "Potions mishap? Defense against the dark arts? Why is he unconscious?" "Neither, madam," Kyle replied quietly. "It happened during charms class. Mikkel cast a lighting charm, and that was it." Professor Flitwick said he must have overused his magic. Yes, clearly he's drained. Wait, what did you say? Madame Pomfrey suddenly spun around, staring at Kyle in disbelief. A lighting charm? Her expression was one of utter incredulity, as though she had just witnessed Dumbledore pole dancing on the astronomy tower. The absurdity of what Kyle had said made her doubt the truth of it. These young wizards are getting more ridiculous by the day. She seemed to think. If they were going to make up a story, at least they could have come up with something believable. Overdraft from a lighting charm? Why not just say Phileas Flitwick had been knocked out by it as well? It's true. The first years from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw all saw it happen, and Professor Flitwick can confirm it, Kyle explained earnestly, giving her a brief account of the incident in the charms classroom. Hearing this, most of Madame Pomfrey's doubt subsided. If both houses had witnessed the event, word would soon spread throughout the school. It wouldn't make sense for Kyle to lie about something so easily exposed, especially when he brought Professor Flitwick's name into it. Still, she turned to look at Mikkel with a mix of bewilderment and curiosity, as though he were some rare magical creature. Never before had she seen a young wizard with such poor control over his magic. From Kyle's description, the magnitude of the lighting charm resembled something closer to accidental magic, powerful but entirely unrestrained. Yet, as she examined Mikkel earlier, she had found no evidence of accidental magic. His condition seemed to be nothing more than simple magical exhaustion. It's really an eye-opener, Madame Pomfrey muttered, almost unconsciously. Kyle nodded vigorously in agreement, fully understanding her disbelief. He felt the same way. If casting a charm were like driving a car, Mikkel had essentially floored the gas pedal, burning through all the fuel in a matter of seconds, sending the car rocketing off at 200 kilometers per second. It might seem impressive, but it was anything but good. It was fortunate that Mikkel had only cast a lighting charm. Kyle shuddered at the thought of what might have happened if it had been incendio. He made a mental note to sit as far away from Mikkel as possible in future classes, as far away as possible. The explosive genius who would be joining Hogwarts next year seemed outrageous enough, but now they had a forbidden spell wizard already in their midst. Hogwarts certainly does not raise idle people, Kyle thought. A few minutes later, Dumbledore arrived, having been informed of the incident, and with him was Professor Snape, who had been pulled out of his lesson. Madame Pomfrey guided them to Michael's bedside, whispered a few words to them, and then stepped aside. Dumbledore leaned in to inspect Mikkel, tapping him lightly with his wand here and there as he assessed the situation. After a while, he put his wand away and turned to Kyle. "Good morning, Kyle. You brought him to Madame Pomfrey, correct?" "Yes, Professor," Kyle confirmed with a nod. "You did well," Dumbledore said with a warm smile. "I've heard what happened. If you hadn't helped those students who fell, there would be more than just Mr. Mikkel lying here." Kyle waved his hands in protest. "It was the right thing to do, Professor, and I wasn't the only one who helped. But you were the first to act," Dumbledore winked. "Many older students, and even adult wizards, struggle to remain calm in an emergency. You did, and you did a fine job. Your bravery and humility have earned Hufflepuff 20 points." As soon as Dumbledore finished speaking, Snape, who had been inspecting Mikkel up until that point, suddenly turned his gaze toward Kyle, as if only just noticing him standing there. Kyle, however, didn't notice Snape's shift in attention. Instead, he looked at Dumbledore and asked, "So, Professor, how is Mikkel? Will he be able to continue his lessons?" Dumbledore smiled reassuringly. "Yes, of course. There's a bit of an issue, but it's easily handled. A potion to suppress his magical overload should do the trick. Our potions professor will be able to prepare it in no time." One day, Snape interjected coldly, stepping closer. "I'll have it ready before tomorrow's potions class for the Hufflepuffs. But before I go, Mr. Chopper, there's something you should remind your friend about." Snape paused, his lips curling into a mocking smile. Tell him to keep his feeble brain and his wand in check. Frequent magical overdrafts can leave a wizard severely weakened, almost like a squib. And I believe you know what that is, don't you? I do, Professor, Kyle replied quickly, his tone respectful but uneasy. Good, Snape said, without further comment. He turned and left the hospital wing without another glance at Kyle. Dumbledore watched him go, then turned back to Kyle. I think we should leave too. Mikkel needs to rest. I suggest you visit him later this afternoon, he said, his usual twinkle in his eye as he guided Kyle toward the door. Now the fun in this clip is over. Which listeners haven't liked and commented yet? You can press like and comment to encourage the admin find the fun in the next clip. May the listeners be happy forever.